So, good morning, my friends. Welcome to maybe the most controversial channel on YouTube. Even though other channels discuss certain topics I talk about, still I see not much shadow banning, right? But I must be doing something right. I must hit certain buttons, which makes YouTube try to hold me back, right? But I'm still here, and I'm thankful to YouTube that I at least can still talk about these things. But also, it is not a bad thing because this channel is not for every person, every human being, right? This is a channel for those who are not afraid to question things and have an open mind and are just not afraid to be called words, and because we just want to get to the truth. What the heck is going on, right? Many people don't see anything going on. They don't see any problem with what's happening, right? But I want to discuss something today. It's basically a theory or a hypothesis, but I'm going to base everything on evidence, right? Whether you like the evidence or not, that's up to you. But there are too many things that don't align with science and history, paleology, all these things, right? Sorry if I mispronounced that. Um, there are so many things coming out that we have to ask questions. What the heck is going on? Let me take off these pop-ups. So I want to talk about my hypothesis about the Genesis story, because I already made videos about Genesis, in which I said that Genesis, the Adamic people were created, and all the other non-Adamic peoples, they are included in chapter 1, where God created all creatures, right? So when you look at other peoples, right, I have to be careful what words I use, but if you look at these other basic peoples, right, I included them in Genesis 1. But I want to present something today that they are not included in Genesis 1, neither in the Adamic creation, because um, most Bibles and scholars and church leaders, and they say that Genesis is about the creation of humanity, humankind, right? I already explained often that Adam does not mean humankind, right? So where do all the things come from, right? Where do the other races come from? And I'm going to present something today that certain peoples of this world who create a lot of havoc at the moment, they are not part of the Genesis story, and therefore Genesis, like everybody always says, what the pastors tell you and so on. Let me get the microphone a little bit closer. They think everything, the whole creation, was Genesis. This is the first creation ever. But what if this is not the first world, the first creation, right? Even in the book of Revelation, we see that God will create a new heaven and a new earth. So who says that God didn't do it multiple times already? And why do I believe that? I'm going to talk about these things today in this video, and I hope that you guys have an open mind, because there's a lot to go through, right? So when in England, I went to a church, and I remember they showed us a video about Genesis, and it was a video in which they showed the time before the Big Bang. It was basically nothing. Then the Big Bang happened, but the universe was a big ball of goo, atomics flying around, right? And so when they read, in the beginning, God created heaven and the earth was without form and void. So without form and void, That means there was a cosmic soup, right? And then God created matter and the planets. But this is what the mainstream church tells us. And when I realized that the story goes back 6,000 years of Adam, I assumed, well, the whole creation, all the stars, the planets, the earth, everything was created 6,000 years ago. And it also led me to not accept archaeologists who talk about that certain structures are like 10,000 years old, because that's impossible, because God created everything 6,000 years ago. And I think this is all nonsense. So I'm going to go into this hypothesis today, showing you that there are already ages and worlds before the Genesis creation. Are you still with? If you're still here, right, you're going to go to the next level today, right? Hi guys, hi Ian, Emma, Ines, John, Phil Brick, Karen, Millennium Realist. Welcome all, White Israelite. White Israelite said, I love truth. Yes, and that's what we are searching for. And we will never be able to find truth if we try to be politically correct or just accept everything they write in our textbooks and history books, right? So this video in England I watched when God created from nothing a blur of soup, and it was without form and void, right? So God, guys, it can't be true, and I'm going to show you why it can't be true, right? First of all, let me show you what I mean, right? I already talked about this before, but I want to take it a step further. It's going to get even crazier. Right? It's going to be crazier than the videos I already made. A lot of people ran away from me with that truth. And now I'm going to even put it up a notch. So let's see how many more people will run away from this, right? Hey, Monica. Good to see you. So, for those who haven't watched the other videos, let me go to the beginning, right? The Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. What beginning? Right? The church says, well, the beginning of everything, right? The Big Bang, right? But like I just said, we see in Revelation that God will create a new heaven and a new earth. So who says that there were not already different heavens and earths before this Genesis, right? In my opinion, in this thesis, this Genesis is the beginning of our history, of our world, this current world, right? That is the beginning Genesis is talking about. And I'm going to tell you why and what evidence I have for that. But first, let's go to scripture. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. What is this language? What does it mean without form and void? Does that mean that the universe was a cosmic soup? Let me read something from Jeremiah, who used the exact same language. So this is in Jeremiah chapter 4. Listen to this. I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void. Same thing as in Genesis. So what does that mean? And the heavens, and they had no light. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens were fled. And beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord and by his fierce anger. So this form, where the earth was without form and void, doesn't mean it was a cosmic soup. It means something happens. The cities were empty. The mountains trembled. This is that same language, right? So it must be, and again, I'm going to show you why I believe that. there must have been a world and a creation before Genesis, because Genesis is a book about our world, current world, and our race. That is what the Bible is about, guys. And I made tons of video already showing you that the whole Adamic story is about our people, right? So where do the other peoples come from? We got a big old continent, and there are the vast majority. Where are they even mentioned, right? Because when God created this heaven and this earth, right, and the Adamic people and all the animals, right, he said it was good, right? Well, can we honestly say that all things we see around us are good? Because a lot of things we see are not good at all, right? And why would God create such a havoc? Why would God create all these people who come in and want to destroy? Why would he do that when he said it was good? That is because there was a big destruction. And this word in in Genesis, where it says, and the earth was without form and void, that word was, that basically means that it has become, right? It has become. It was destroyed. Therefore, it was without form and void, because something happened. That word was means basically has become, right? Therefore, also, when God created the Adamic people, he told them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. It says it here in Genesis 1:28. Replenish. That means refill. If you go to the McDonald's and you order a Coca-Cola, it's not a refill. It only becomes a refill when you buy a Coca-Cola, you drink it empty, the cup is empty, now you can get a refill. That means the refill is not your first Coke, it means there was already Coke in there before you emptied it. That is the same thing, replenish the earth and subdue it, right? Nothing about it, it's just the first time. All these things show us that the Genesis creation was not the beginning of all. The Genesis is the beginning of Genesis. The word genes in that, it's just our story. So where do the other peoples come from? Well, first of all, the church says, well, Noah had 3 sons. The whole earth was flooded, and there was only a few survivors. There was Noah and his sons, and his one son was black, sub-Saharan African. His other son was brown, right, like the modern day Jews and Arabs. And the third one, Japhet, was Caucasian. And this is where all the races come from. But if that is true, what about the Chinese people, the Mongolian race? Where did they come from if there is only 3 sons, right? Or if you had Noah had a black sub-Saharan son, a white European looking son, and a Chinese son, if that is true, where do these other people come from, right? Even though, yes, many are mixed, but guys, obviously, Noah had 3 sons of the same kind. These were his offspring, right? You don't get 3 children of the 3 different races. That just does not happen, right? This is just the church trying to be politically correct and include everything, which is now resulting at the end of this age. Again, guys, there is a reason that God in Genesis told us kind after kind. Of course, plants and trees and animals know this. They do that automatically. So why did God needed to be so specific? Well, obviously, before God started over, this happened. So he had to put it in law. Don't do it. Right? And it did happen. I'm going to talk about all these things today. Right? But so far, Genesis in this thesis is not the Big Bang story. right? It's not the creation of all races, right? I think many things entered into our book history, which were already before this book. So something huge happened, guys, and we had minor resets, and we had huge resets, which resetted the whole planet or flat Earth, whatever you mean, but the whole thing was reset. But we also see in Revelation that also resets happened on a smaller scale, right? It's going to be very interesting because I'm going to show you proof, guys, of what I'm saying. Dave says, I'm already blown away by the new heaven and the new earth. I see now that there was probably other worlds of living beings on earth before Adam and Eve were created. Yes, exactly. So, like I said, I made videos about the pre-Adamic people. That means in Genesis 1, when God created all the animals and all creatures, I included the sub-Saharan people and the Chinese people in that. But today I'm going to talk about that and not even in there. God created animals we were living with, right? Actual livestock and these things, right? But God did not create them. So where did it come from? They came from a world that was before the Genesis story. And they were survivors, right? Of all the ages, all the resets, there were always survivors, right? That's also for example, they find caves, right? And they say, well, that is a 10,000-year-old cave. So the narrative is these were Neanderthals who gradually evolved and became Homo erectus, right? And they lived in caves and they started to make tools. But what, not all, but what of a lot of these stories about cave dwellers were people who survived the big destruction? There was nothing left and they hid in these caves. Can you imagine if there is an atomic war tomorrow? Everything is burned up, everything is destroyed, but there are pockets of survivors. They don't have modern day cars no more, they don't have cell phones no more, they have nothing. So they have to start from scratch. So they're going to make simple tools. They start over again. Right? I hope that you can see where this is going, right? You know, I was watching a documentary about Göbekli Tepe in modern day Turkey, right? No, it's not Turkish history because the Turks only moved in, 600 years ago. I'm talking about Göbekli Tepe, which the archaeologists say that is like 9 or 10,000 years old. So that's even older than when God formed Adam, right? So according to, because these scientists if you spend a lot of money going to college, university, you become a doctor, you get your master's, you become a virologist or an archaeologist or a I'm sorry, I can't remember all the English words. It's not my first language, but you know what I'm getting. All these people who study history, paleontology, all these things. If they walk away from the narrative they have learned, they lose their careers, they lose their licenses, everything, right? Same thing with church leaders, right? If you go to a certain Bible school, you divert from their teachings, you're going to be excommunicated. You're going to lose your license of being a pastor. That is everywhere the same. They create a narrative, you stick to it, otherwise you cannot do it professionally. That's why we, the common man, come in, because we cannot lose our licenses, right? Whether it is about virology, history, archaeology, right? We have an open mind, right? So basically, the archaeologists, they excavate stuff, but they base their theory of what they find, they base it on the mainstream narrative. So to go back to Göbekli Tepe, 10,000 years old, I think they said it is. And what were these huge temples doing there? Because according to the same scientists, 10,000 years ago, we were Neanderthals. We walked around in animal skins, right? We didn't have any, we just started to make simple tools. We carved rocks, made them into blades, right? And at the same time, we built these huge cities already. And how did they even make it? Göbekli Tepe is even older, thousands of years older than the pyramids, right? It doesn't make any sense that it was created in the time that people were still Neanderthals, or we were still evolving. It doesn't make any sense, but they just totally ignore it. What about the gold mines in South Africa? Right? They are estimated 200,000 years old. 200,000 years old. Right? South Africa, guys. Thousands of them. Right? And when you go North Africa, they find ancient rivers underneath all that Sahara Desert. They find structures. They find all kinds of stuff there. Something happened that buried it in a big layer of sand. And then you have Central Africa, where basically nothing is found, right? But then you go to South Africa, up to Rhodesia, right? I still like to call it Rhodesia, but this is where you find gold mines. 200,000 years old. Guys, there have been multiple resets, multiple destructions, right? So we're going to go over a lot of areas before the Genesis creation. So also going to talk about giants, the giant trees, right? Years ago, I saw a video from a Russian guy, and he called that video, "There Are No Forests on Earth." And I'm like, what's he talking about? Of course there are forests. I don't know if you know that video, but he opened up that whole thing, that things that we thought were mountains were actually giant trees. I'm talking about a tree that must have been like 6 to 60 miles high, right? You see a flat plane somewhere in the world, Africa, South America, Europe, flat, and then suddenly a thing coming up. It looks exactly like a tree. But in this time, these were not carbon-made trees. This was a different creation, right? That's why these trees are petrified, and we find gemstones in them, right? We're going to talk all over that, and this makes so much more sense. If we compress all that archaeology, the ancient trees, the gems, the ancient temples, in a short time, nothing makes sense, guys. And many people just ignore it, right? Hey, Jan. Jan says, Genesis shows two separate creations of humanity. 127, he created man in his image, male and female. Eve had not been created yet. 2:7, he created Adam and placed him in the garden. Yes, well, the way I see it, because that word Adam is the same, right? But in Genesis 1, God created the Adam, male and female. He created them. This is where God created the Adamic people, right? And from all those people in Genesis 2, God formed the man Adam from the dust of the ground. What does that mean, from the dust of the ground? Let me read something else to you, if I can find it. Numbers. Let me go to Numbers. Numbers. I can't find it so quickly, but you can look it up for yourself. There's so much. I'm sorry. There's so much I want to go over. When Numbers talks about that, it's talking about the dust of Jacob, the dust. So people were also referred to as dust, right? Who were these people living on the earth. Who were thus the Adamic people? And I don't think Adam was the first white man, but that God formed him out of the dust, meaning that he was chosen to be the first king and priest. That's what I believe, right? Because there was no Adam to till the ground. I think it's all very symbolical language also, that it was not, they were not fruitful, right? So that is my take. Genesis 1 is talking about, let us make man in our image. Hebrew says the Adam. Let us make Adam in our image. And Adam means to be of a ruddy complexion, able to blush, show blood in the face, aka white man, right? So I think the man in Genesis 1 is the white race. And then from that white race in Genesis 2, God formed Adam, right? That's the way I see it. But why would God also create races that now turn against us, right? When he said it is good, where do they come from? Well, I'm going to talk about, let's go to the races first, because who are these people who are in our lands and want to take over and tell you what to say, what to do? They want to go into legislation in the governments, they want to be mayors, and they tell you you're evil. Who are these people who came into our lands, right? Well, if you go do DNA study, genetic study, they have. I'm not talking about those who are already mixed with white people. A lot of them aren't, right? I'm talking about the original ones who came from the big old continent. They have like 20% archaic DNA. That means non-human DNA. Now, the scientists don't want to use that word, so they call it ghost DNA because they don't know where it comes from. But I do know where that comes from. And it ties in with a lot of stories, ancient stories we have from Samaria and other creation stories, right? Every time old tales, old writings talk about creation, it's not, this is an old theme that goes through all the different ages and worlds, guys. So that brings me to the Anunnaki. Right? Many people believe that the Anunnaki were aliens in spaceships and they came down to planet Earth to mine gold. So they needed a slave race. So they say the politically correct scientists and people who discovered all this, they say these were aliens who created humanity, humankind, all the different races to be the slaves to the aliens, right? That is the most accepted narrative, and I don't believe it. I believe that the Anunnaki were men, right? Hence, that you have stories from Samaria who talking about how the priestesses had intercourse with other creatures to create a slave race, because these other creatures, they were in my opinion, these are like Homo erectus, right? So they were not apes, but they were also not human. They were strong, big creatures, two-legged creatures, right? But they were dangerous, they were very strong, but they were not smart enough to work. So they created a hybrid, right? They started to mix the Adam with these creatures, and now they were less strong, easier to control, but became more intelligent that you could use them for your labor. And I believe this is what actually happened. And this is why you still find in that big old continent that they have 20% non-human DNA, because they are a hybrid of different creatures. And hence that happened far before Genesis. That's what God in Genesis said, kind after kind, because that obviously already happened. right? So the Anunnaki are not aliens who made humankind. The Anunnaki were the white leaders who created the slave people, right? By the way, white people, wherever they went, they were always considered gods, right? So if the old texts talk about gods, you know, it's not aliens or literal gods as we see it. No, everywhere we went, we were seen as, our ancestors were seen as gods, right? So that's one. So I believe that in the creation before Genesis, there were all kinds of creatures, right? Yes, there were Neanderthals. They were, they find bones 50,000 years old. They call them Homo erectus, right? The modern day humans they call Homo sapiens. But the link before that is not a link, but there were creatures that were called Homo erectus. They were basically two-legged creatures, as they call them, right? And they were all roaming the earth back then, right? So I think there was a big destruction. The earth became empty and void, but that does not mean that they were all wiped out. They probably hid in caves. They hid and even probably most of Africa, Central Africa, was not even destroyed, right? So what were they gonna do without the Anunnaki, the gods, right? The gold mines are empty, right? No one was mining. Everything was destroyed, right? So they just lived there for love of 50,000, 100,000 years. They just lived there, right? But they were not intelligent enough to do anything. Hence, that we can go now to that place and still find people who don't do anything, right? So we see also that you can teach them all kinds of things, but by themselves, they just don't do anything, right? And now you see that it is very politically incorrect, but it is all based on logic, reason, and proof and science, guys. Hi, you white girl. Hey, Karen, Alfredo. Yes, cut by the book. Jesus quoted God in Psalms 82. Ye are gods, right? Ye are Elohim. Hi, Christina. So, first of all, these people came, they were not created in a Genesis. They were the mixed create. There was all kinds of mixed creatures, and they survived this destruction before the Genesis story, right? But they always were used as labor, right? Second thing, when the Bible speaks about the Nephilim, right? They taught us, well, Nephilim is talking about the giants. No, Nephilim does not mean giant. Nephilim literally means fallen one. So, fallen from what? Well, when the Bible speaks about heaven and earth, it's not talking about the planet and the sky, the universe. No, it is symbolical language. Heaven means from under heaven, from heaven. That means an heavenly authority and heavenly dominion, right? So these fallen ones are not angels who fell out of the sky from heaven, literally, or giants. These were people who had the dominion, the rulership from heaven before Genesis, right? They are called fallen ones, right? And these people, yeah, they started to mix, right? Men of renown came of that. Worthy adversaries, strong men, right? Men of renown, the mixed, because I started again. That's why after God formed Adam, Because Adam was not the first white man. Of course, Adam, there were already people around, guys. Right? Cain even left and he started to marry women, build cities. You need a lot of people to build cities, guys. Right? And this theory that Adam had incest with his daughters, and guys, it is not true. God already created the white race. Genesis 1, they were everywhere, right? So that's the whole point. So what happened from Adam to Noah? Well, people say, well, they became evil and they were just drinking. They didn't care. So God flooded the whole earth. Guys, if people are disobedient, right, you don't need to destroy the entire earth. You don't even have to drown them. So what must have been the problem? The problem was what God already said, kind after kind. Because I just told you, this already happened. You have creatures mixed with each other. And when you read Enoch and the book of Jasher, it talks about genetic mixing, right? The church tells you, well, the human with dogs and dogs with giraffes and became a strand. God had to get, no, guys, a human cannot make offspring with a dog, right? A giraffe cannot make offspring with a cow. So there was not laboratoria there. There were not scientists trying to mix DNA. This was the Adamic race intermixing with other species again. That's why it became so lawless and evil, just like we see today. That's why Jesus said it will be as in the time of Noah, right? So where that whole story of Adam started over, right? God flooded that whole place, right? I don't think this flood was worldwide, right? Because there are a lot of places where still people lived for thousands of years, right? That's why it's a ridiculous idea that, well, the whole planet was covered in water, so we have no choice but to think that Noah had 3 races as sons. No. This flood didn't touch Central Africa or China, guys. This was about the Adamic race who were so corrupt in their genes that God chose Noah, because he said Noah was still perfect in his genealogy. That's why he flooded and preserved Noah, because Noah was still perfect, a perfect descendant of Adam. He was not mixed, right? That's why the flood came, guys. And yes, there were more destructions of the world, right? So that's one thing, right? So who people say, well, there were giants, right? We find giant bones. There are stories about giants, so they must have been fallen angels mating with women. No, a spiritual angel cannot have sex with a woman because a spiritual angel doesn't have sperm, right? The mixing of the fallen ones, right? The king of Babylon was called the fallen one, right? Isaiah talks about how the king of Babylon fell from heaven, meaning he fell from his authority, right? Lucifer. No, Lucifer was not a literal angel falling from the universe. It was the king of Babylon who had an heavenly authority but fell from this authority. That is what fallen means, right? So where did the giants come from? Well, they came from the same place or even before, or lived together with the people I just discussed. They were already on this earth before the Genesis, right? Why would God create giants, guys? Why would God create all these different? He did not do that in the Genesis. He said it was good. So these giants were also surviving the big destruction, right? I hope it starts to make sense, right? What about these giant trees made of silicone, right? The Genesis creation trees is all carbon based. So why do we have found out that these giant trees who would have been miles high, right? And now we can see they're cut down. They look like mountains, but they are just all tree stumps, right? Made of silicon, right? Like Devil's Tower, California. They say science says no, it's just lava. No, it's not lava, guys. You can clearly see it's a tree. These are maybe part of a worlds ago, right? We don't know how long these ages lasted, right? Maybe it went back hundreds of thousands, maybe a million years. We don't know. But we do know that also these giant trees were not part of the Genesis creation, right? Do you see where I am going with this, guys? Yes, cut by the book. If we read Genesis and the earth was empty and void, and we imagine some cosmic soup, that doesn't make any sense, right? And the Bible always has other parts in the Bible that explain certain things, right? Yes, white Israel and the Greek mythology also. Did you know that in the ancient books of India, that they have the same story? They even have paintings and books where men made it with apes. In those drawing books, they look like chimpanzees. They were not chimpanzees. These were archaic non-humans, right? The Indians talk about how man mixed with these other creatures. The Sumerians talk about it. Right? We find it all over the ancient history, right? Guys, it is not a mystery, right? But it is so politically incorrect that, yeah, people just don't want to hear it, right? Cuthbert the book says Earth is called dry land in Genesis. It seems that he restricted living space as well by raising the sea level. Yeah, I believe that. Levels rose, levels fell. Um, why do we find 200,000 years old gold mines in South Africa, right? Why is it all destroyed? Why are and they had a perfect uh, mathematical, geographical um, alignment with the stars. They knew stuff back then, right? But you have to ask your questions. These temples that are 200,000 years old, or 10,000 years old, or 6,000 years old, right? Or what? How come, if allegedly people were primitives like apes, why would they build stone temples, right? Secondly, uh, before I was a Christian, I loved Eric van Daniken. I watched all the videos on YouTube, and I bought his book. What was it called? Something with the gods, something. But he goes to all these ancient ruins. I'm talking about thousands upon thousands of years old, right? Or remnants. Why is that? Why in South America? Why in the middle of nowhere do we find these perfectly carved blocks? It doesn't make any sense. And if these people back then had technology, which they had, obviously, why would they only make a few stones and that's it? Why would you only make a wall, right? Maybe everything was destroyed and they still had the knowledge, the ones who survived, right? And they made these things to show us, right? They made it in stone because they knew it would last and they showed us. But obviously, there would have been technology, not in the way we see it today, but I really believe they knew how to work with frequencies, sounds, vibrations. They had a knowledge, guys. And this knowledge is still around. They just hide it from us, right? So when they say it was fallen angels who gave this technology, they're not talking about some spiritual beings. It's talking about there were survivors always from these destructions who gave us the technology. The idea that Adam was the first man, but he already had a language, right? He already his his sons built cities, right? Adam was not the first man, right? But the Adamic creation was a new creation called Genesis, with all the animals we eat, the clean and the unclean animals. But there were obviously creations from an older world still here. Giant trees, giant people, right? Archaic creatures, right? Two-legged creatures was still there, right? And if tomorrow this earth will be destroyed, right, you're still going to have pockets of people who survive here and there, right? I hope it starts to make sense now, right? Diodorus said that the blacks on the banks of the Nile were far removed from humankindness. Yeah. People look at Egypt or Ethiopia and North Africa today in the Middle East, and they see in the Middle East they are brown. North Africa, mostly brown. Egypt, you see brown, but also very dark-skinned Egyptians. And you go to Somalia, Ethiopia, the most are brown or black. So they assume it has been there for thousands of years, that's not true. Of course, Ham was a white man, even though Ham also started to intermix, right? And also family of the Greeks, according to the book of Jasher. They intermarried with Ethiopians, right? Ethiopian Greek is just sunburned, right? It was very hot there. It was sunburned, but it doesn't mean that everyone was black, like you white girl just said. That the blacks, the real blacks, they were much more south, but it became more and more north, right? And later also entered Egypt, and it became multicultural, right? That led to destruction, which we see today as well. But you still can see, when you go to Somalia, for example, or Ethiopia, you can see very light-skinned Ethiopians, a little bit more brown skin, but you have blue eyes. That's still a remnant of the white DNA there. And you have very dark ones, right? So there has always been a mixing going on, guys. And all the ancient tales, whether you go to the Far East or India or the ancient Sumerian tablets, they all talk about this, right? There are even Sumerian stories where the king ordered the priestesses to intermix with these creatures to create a slave race. It's all right there. But because it's politically incorrect, they say now the Anunnaki were aliens who made humankind. But Adam does not mean humankind, guys. Were the Greek gods actually fallen angels and Satan? No. Satan means adversary. Satan is not a being, right? It means adversary. So we can be an adversary. Other races can be an adversary. Other teachings, mind can be adversary, right? Jesus even called Peter Satan, right? When he was adverse against God's will, right? God's plan. Jesus knew that at an appointed time he would be crucified, right? And Jesus wanted to go on with that because he knew it would save us, right? But Peter said, "Come on, let's go, Peter. Let's run away." And Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan," because Peter had a worldly fear. He wanted to stop all that. He meant it well, but Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." So Satan is not a being, right? And fallen angels. Fallen angels, right? Fallen ones, the fallen ones. We always think about fallen ones that must have been angels, literally. But no, I believe fallen ones were people from another world who possibly still are around, which they call the reptilians, right? They're not really reptiles, but yeah, possibly there are still people around us who are not of the Genesis story, who came from an older world and who have all this knowledge and technology. They don't share with everybody. Have you seen that video with someone um, put a microscope in that phone, and it was like a microchip, and then he zoomed in, and there was a microchip in that microchip, and then he zoomed in, and there was more, and it came to such a level that it is humanly impossible to make it. Now, does it mean aliens made that? No, but there could have been people with a lot of knowledge all through the world who always stayed here and worked together with governments. But we think they are demons or angels. No, I think I think it is much more simpler than that. Hey, Angie. Yes, Angie says that she has been knowing this for a long time. You know, if you are true, we all feel it, right? We all say it, but they have the adversaries of the Adamic race have been working so hard, right? And now you have a lot of our brothers and sisters. Yeah, I saw it in England, right? Most of the English people are fed up that the country is being taken over, and in a few decades they will just a minority. And then you have still other Adamic people who say, let them in, these illegals, thousands a day. From Africa, from North, just let them in. Anti-racism, you're fascists, right? So the real enemy is in our own people. The real Antichrist is with our own people, guys. Yes, Karen, God created was a new creation in Genesis. Yeah, he just everything was such a mess and evil because if there was a creation before the Genesis, right? People were really advanced, obviously, when you look at these structures they made. But that doesn't mean they were morally superior, right? God destroyed it. He doesn't care how technologically advanced people become. He cares about righteousness, morality. And now, today, again, you see that now technology is sprinting upwards, right? Slowly, but now it's going in the face. You can't even keep up, right? What Elon Musk is trying to do with his robots, IA, all these things. But the technology is now going so fast, but we're not keeping up with morality, guys, right? Same thing happens every time, right? God cares more about having a creation that can live in truth and harmony together rather than what they try to do with all the technology, destroy us, right? And every time technology overrides morality, there is a destruction every single time, right? Yes, I am Lamb. Understand the two creations, but asking about even before that. Yes, Genesis was the creation of the Adamic people and our animals, our cattle, right? The clean and unclean animals. That was all for us. That was our creation. It was for us, right? But there obviously was remnants of creations from an older world. Right? This is where the giants come from, the giant trees, the other races, right? Uh, they recently found, I think it was in Thailand or Indonesia, a race of people that was only like 3, 4, 5 feet high, adults, right? Little, smaller than pygmies even. Why were God created in Genesis? These are all remnants of a way older world, guys. Yeah, we have to be a separate people, but the governments don't want us to be separate no more. The governments want to get rid of us, right? Under the guise of diversity, but they are destroying diversity, right? Because the Adamic race is the most diverse race in the world, right? Blue eyes, green eyes, gray eyes, brown eyes, hazel eyes, blonde hair, white hair, brown hair, dark brown, dark blonde, right? We're the only race who have that. And he want to destroy it, right? Because God destroyed worlds for a reason. But the survivor of these old worlds, they still have the destruction on the minds, right? And these are the real demons, guys. These are demons, right? When you think of demons, you think, oh, spirits and stuff. No. Demons are the destroyers of this world, and we are letting them in because they have told us that we have to be politically correct, right? All men are created equal. But what do you consider to be a man? Because according to the Bible, man is the Adam, and not all races are of Adam, right? Yes, Monica, angels didn't intermix with anyone. No, the fact that because most Christians, well, the Bible seems to say it, and my pastor tells, so I'm going to believe it. But an angel, like we see it, like a spiritual being, cannot have intercourse with a woman, right? Angels don't have a sex, right? Spiritual angels. Also, they don't have seed. And to think that an angel had sex with a woman and a 100 feet giant came out of that, it doesn't make any sense, guys. Yeah, you're right, Monica. Angie said, they cannot hide knowledge fully because they cannot disconnect us from God. Amen. Amen. And you know, if you're really connected to God, you have a desire for truth that is so strong that overrides your fear of being called names, right? And we see a lot of, even in Christianity, a lot of fear of being called names. And it is not always fear, it is a genuine belief that what the churches has taught them and science has taught them that it is true, right? And also Jesus said, love your neighbor, right? So we have to bring sub-Saharan African in by the millions. We have to bring Islam in, different religions, right? Because Jesus said, love your enemies. They believe that is the context what Jesus was talking about, right? But obviously, when Jesus said, love your neighbor, love your brother, even love your enemies, Jesus was speaking about how we as a society should interact with each other, right? A neighbor does not mean a Muslim with a whole different religion, right? A neighbor does not mean someone from sub-Saharan Africa, right? A neighbor is someone from your community. Your brother is someone from your race, or even direct family, or your extended family. But even we, as Adamite people, can become each other's enemy, right? Paul even said to his kinsmen, have now become your enemy because I tell you the truth, right? It has nothing to do with religions that want to destroy you or races that want to destroy you. Because don't be deceived, these people, these other races, these pre-Genesis races want to destroy you, right? Even though they say they don't, now that we just want to know, you can tell by their actions, not even the words, that they want to destroy you. Have you noticed that some of the other peoples that they have no problem that we are disappearing? And also, there's a lot of street dogs here, right? I'm not saying they are dogs, no, I'm just giving an example. Street dogs here. Have you ever, I got dogs too, so I have to be careful. I got a female dog, she's not neutered. When she is in heat, dogs from 5 blocks away can smell it, and he come in my front yard waiting for her. I have to keep her in the house or keep those dogs away. But the thing is, they get triggered, they get an impulse, the pheromones, they smell it, and they don't care. In the middle of the street, they will try to make a litter of puppies. Do these dogs think about Can I take care of these doggies? Will I have enough food for it? They don't care. They smell it, and it is exactly with Genesis creatures. They don't think, can I take care of? If I make kids, can I take care of them? Will I have enough food for? They just do it anyway. 5, 6, 7, right? And this is how they destroy us, even though some are not even aware of it. But it is actually happening, guys. And it is all encouraged also by the media. Netflix, Hulu, right? Look at all these promotion of this mixing. It is as in the time of Noah, right? These stories about, there were creatures mixing. I hear channels talk about how back then they already genetically modified. No, guys, they didn't have laboratories back then. This was the Adamic race interacting with pre-Genesis creatures, and everything became a mess. That's why God flooded that whole place there and stayed with Noah, who was perfect in his genealogy. And now we are in the times of Noah. We have all kinds of creatures who look human, who are called human, who are part of humanity. They are a kind of human or humankind. And we are now creating a new creature that is a mix of all that. Is it getting better? No, it's not getting better. I don't know if you have recently followed the news in England, right? But it is every day, every week, these other creatures doing horrible stuff to Adamic children in England, right? But the media, the movies, that they censor you, right? You can't talk about that. And in the meantime, this age is ending, guys. This cannot go on. They estimated in 2050 everyone will be gone of us, right? We'll be so heavily mixed up that this whole Adamic race. So this is the end, right? White Israelite says, where did giants and titans come from? Well, like I said, in my opinion, they were not. In Genesis, God did not talk about that he created giants, right? And the idea that angels made it with women and yeah, you have 1,000 feet giants, it doesn't make any sense. These were also survivors from the destruction before Genesis. They survived that, right? Like I said, there's always remnants and pockets in this world where survived. Someone just mentioned it, ancient mud fossil. I think if I'm right, it's an old man, and he's even showing dragons, like all ancient creatures, the size of countries, right? He shows you fossilized dragons where there's a mountain, but when you look for the satellite, they look exactly in the shape of a dragon, right? This all is possible, guys, but God did not create that in Genesis. These are all older worlds, and we have layers upon layers of different worlds, right? We even see, I think it's in Thailand, big stone parts that come out of mountains but look like elephants, with the trunk and everything, fossilized, petrified. Guys, before Genesis, there were so many different ages and worlds. Where do you think these giants come from? Have you ever seen these giant trees? Right? Cut down trees. Just like, what's it called? National Park here, right? I can't even remember what it's called. Right? National Treasure. Guys, these are big, huge quarries. Ancient quarries. Right? We find temples 100,000 years old. Right? Way before the pyramids. Yes, the pyramids were built But we don't find them just in Egypt. We find them in China, everywhere. This was also in a specific time. If we try to squeeze everything in 6,000 years, guys, we're going to get in trouble. There are way older worlds than that. Yes, Monica, exactly. The stories of giants are in children's stories of old, right? Also, there are stories from huge trees where you could climb up into heaven, right? They're all cut down. Yeah, I don't know what YouTube is doing, guys. I did a test this morning, and when I announced this live video, it says one waiting. So I did a test with a few other phones, clicked on waiting, and it still kept one, right? Also, it says it had one like, and I on multiple people, which I knew, clicked on like, and it kept one. So YouTube is, when I get 20 new subscribers, I stay at the same level of subscribers since last half year now. So what YouTube is doing, people who not regularly watch me, they take away the subscriptions to keep me from reaching a certain threshold, right? So it takes away comments, it takes away likes to not, get me over that edge to really, but that's fine, right? Sometimes I also delete comments if trolling. I know if people deliberately troll without end, then I'm just gonna delete that, right? Tesem Ilo says, what about Oak of Bashan? I don't know what that is. Oak of Bashan. Yeah. What is Oak of Bashan, guys? Let me know. Tesem. So it is just time to get real, guys. These gold mines in South Africa were not created by sub-Saharan African people, right? But we see that the so-called Anunnaki, they had gold mines all over the world. But they needed labor. So by their own writings in Samaria and India, all the most ancient writing is talking about that they created a slave race. They created men. The priestesses had to create these slave men, right? They became less strong, but a little bit more intelligent, the perfect slave. Not too smart, not too strong, just the perfect combination of worker, right? And when that era was destroyed, right? Because you see temples, everything, right? When that time period was over, yeah, these people survived. And they have lived there for thousands of years, right? But because they were not as smart as the Anunnaki, right? They just lived there. They didn't build anything. They didn't build cities because they were used to just. They had to tell them, okay, you're going to mine, you're going to dig for gold. And when that all destroyed, the leadership was gone. They didn't know what to do. And they built huts. That's it, for thousands of years, right? But now we bring in these people in. Now we start to mix with them again, right? And then we wonder why the violence is going up, the murder rate is going up, morality is going down. Why is that, guys? Is it just a cultural thing? No. We are in the times of Noah again, guys. Oh, Clement says, and the coast of Og, king of Bashan, which was of the remnant of the giants that dwelt as Astaroth and at Edrei. See, yeah. Well, it says there, indeed, the remnant. There were remnants left, right? Nowhere in Genesis does it say that God created giants or demons or fallen. He didn't do that, guys. But the idea that God had these beautiful, perfect angel beings, and a third of them started to rebel. So God cast them down, and now they became demons. And these demons, these fallen angels, they mated with women, and now you had 1,000 feet giants. And this all, guys, incredible. And we always believed that. But the fallen ones were obviously those pre-Genesis who messed up big. And they were all, God created giants in old worlds. Didn't work out, right? Yeah. You can look it up on YouTube. It's called There Are No Forests on Earth. Some Russian guy, I think an American lady narrated it. Look at it. You can see pictures of mountains, which are not mountains. They are old trees with miles in diameter, guys. It's all pre-Genesis. Monica says, we are so different from other races, and it has taken me this invasion by Gog and Magog to fully realize this and to fiercely defend our lineage, yeah. Well, the demons, the evil, these are pre-Genesis creatures who are still pissed, right? And now God created something new, and it was good, right? And they would have the dominion. They would replenish the earth, right? To have dominion, right? To subdue. So that was the task for Adam. So what happened to Adam? Well, the Nakesh, who was more cunning than all the beasts of the field, came to Adam. And the way I see it always is that the snake, that was a two-legged creature, whether he was a fallen white man or a mixed race man. But anyway, he could speak and reason. And he beguiled Eve. How did he beguile her? What was the task of Adam? To have dominion and to subdue. Did God really say that? No. You know, we're all equal, guy. This is where this whole liberalism started. Equality started. It started there in the garden. Don't take that dominion. You're not all that. We're all equal, right? You can eat of the tree, no problem, right? There were many trees. They were good for food, right? There were many Adamic families. They're all good for food. Not that one. You eat from that, right? This is what happened, guys. In my opinion, in my humble opinion. Yeah, that is the theory of the double seed line, that Eve had sex with a demon, right? And now there are demon people. That is also a theory, right? I'm not sure if Eve cheated on Adam, and then she gave. So Eve had sex with a demon, and then she went to Adam, and because she also gave it the fruit to Adam, so Adam had sex with that demon. Guys, I'm not fully convinced of that theory, right? But one thing I am convinced about, that is that God created us in Genesis to start over, right? But there were survivors, giants, archaic creatures, two-legged creatures, right? In the book of Jasher, there was even described a race that had tails, right? God knows what kinds of creatures crawled around, right? So, to me, it makes a lot of sense, guys, because we find so much stuff that is like 50,000 years old, right? 12,000 years ago, we had an ice age. Everything started to melt. My opinion, that was the end, maybe, of Atlantis, right? And the Atlanteans sank there because the water rose, and the survivors of Atlantis also went fled into other places, right? Of course, they were also Adamic people. Maybe they were the follower. There's a lot to consider, guys. But we are not all created equal, right? We are just not. Because God, why would God create things that is so obviously not good? God said it is good. The animals, the Adamic people, it's good. So now I'm going to form Adam to be the first king and priest. It's good, right? But the Adamic people didn't listen. They encountered all these other creatures, and the whole thing became evil and corrupt. That's why God brought the flood, right? So yeah, watch that video. There are no forests on Earth. Watch it. It's on YouTube, and you can see that there was even a creation where everything was silicone. That's why we find petrified trees, petrified animals, silicon based, right? And a Genesis creation, everything is based on carbon, right? That's why we don't get petrified, right? We rot, right? We return to dust, right? Well, Alfredo, there are a lot of peoples on this earth who say they are Christian, and at the same time, they hate the Adamic people so deeply. They come to kill and destroy. And at the same time, they call themselves Christians, right? Yes, Alfredo, giant cedars, right? We still have giant trees in California, right? But they are nothing compared to what we see in those trees that are maybe a million years old, 500,000 years old. I don't know when that creation was, but there is obviously layers and layers, not just over the 6,000 years, because yes, I believe in the last 6,000 years since the story of Adam started, there were many destructions, right? Why do you think we find Sumerian tablets buried in 20 feet of soil? Why are all these ancient uh, um, temples destroyed of Assyria and Babylon? Why was the Roman Empire destroyed? Right? Why do we find Roman settlements underneath every city? Something happened. There are, I'd like to call them micro resets, right? But there is only big resets, and it was the reset which led to the Genesis creation. That was a whole reset, right? Even though some survived that as well, right? And also in the 1800s, there must have been some kind of reset when we see all these mud flood buildings, right? But if this keeps on going the way we're going now, with all the people walking around who are no longer Adamic, right? I saw this interview of a guy who asked brown people and black people, what about that we should mix races? And they all said, well, I see no problem. He said, yeah, but that would mean that there is no more white men. None of them had any problem with it. So they come into your Adamic nations, but they have no problem that you disappear, right? We can all be brown and black hair. Well, what's the problem? They just don't see the problem, right? So inherently, they don't understand Adam. They are not of Adam, right? And it is hard for other races because some races they have a love for us. They have a love for God. But there are peoples on this earth, they just can't. It is just not in them. They are not part of this, right? They are not part of this. They're not going to be part of this new heaven and new earth. They're not going to be part of it, right? For a lot of people, it is really, even if they call themselves Christians, they don't love us, right? You just ask them, how do you feel about the white man disappearing? Well, I'm a Christian, so I don't care. Because God does look at race, they say. Yeah, but we are literally, after thousands of years, we are being destroyed. They don't care. They don't care. So it is for mixed races very hard. And I'm not saying it's impossible, because some seem to really care, but the majority, they just don't care, guys. Yeah, I live next to one, Alfredo says. Monica says, will we ever know the truth about life on Earth? I think the common day that we know the truth. Yeah, whether it is before you die or after you die, but there will be a truth revealed, right? And Jesus said that he will reveal truth that was hidden since ancient times, right? But now we are back in a place, right? Short season of Satan, if you will, where there's a lot of confusion again. Everything is just being messed up again. Oh, you got the twins, Alfredo. Yeah, that's nice. Yes, White Israel says, I grew wary at the out of Africa narrative. Total garbage. Yeah. And many Christians believe this. They believe that Adam is referring to the first human that was a sub Saharan African. And then the sub Saharan African started to migrate, right? And then the sub Saharan black man went to Europe, but it was colder there. So he evolved into a Caucasian man, right? Because it is colder, so he had to become white. And then this black man went all the way to China, but the temperature was different, so he became more yellow, Chinese looking. Guys, it is all nonsense, right? Temperature doesn't change your DNA. It does. The only thing that changes your DNA is mixing, right? And there are sub-Saharan African. Sub-Saharan African have 20% that is not even human DNA, ghost DNA, right? So they are mixed with creatures from before Genesis story, right? But if you intermix with them, right, and you see that most people who are mixed, they stop caring immediately. They're very liberal, very right, very politically correct. They don't care. They stop caring. Why would they, right? Phil Break says Sammy Hagar's song "Crack in the World" about the year 2025 being the end. It was written 50 years ago. It's been shared a lot this week on social media. Pre-programming. Yeah. Well, we are experiencing the end of our world, at least our cultural and genetic world, right? If this keeps on going a few more decades, it's already too late, guys. The next generation, we are already outnumbered. People don't want to believe it. Like I always say in Brussels, Belgium, 82% of the people below 20 is now African, North African. 82%, that means it is over. Belgium will no longer be an Adamic nation. Also, where I'm from, the Netherlands, all the big cities are majority non-Adamic people. When you go to London, I think it's only 34% British left. The rest is non-Adamic, right? So all this technology, right? People always say, fallen angel demons. No. Technology has been around for hundreds of thousands of years, guys. It's just strange that they have all this technology that we only find ruins, right? That is really strange. If you have like 12,000 years ago, if you knew how to move 60,000 pound blocks and make these walls and cut them perfectly, if you have that technology, why can't we find more? I don't know, right? Maybe everything was destroyed and the people who survived used that technology to show us, for, hey, we were here, right? But obviously, even not that long ago, even in the Millennium Kingdom, they had technology we don't know yet. They hide from us, guys. It's impossible that in the 1800s in America, they built these huge, massive buildings with marble and granite. There are blocks that weigh 5,000 tons, and they moved that on a dirt road with a horse and buggy. Guys, our modern day pickup trucks cannot even move blocks like that, right? They had obviously technology, and in the 1800s, everything changed. They took away our history, changed history, stole our technology. There was a small group, right, the Masons, who honed all knowledge, and they just made us into nothing, right? The Rockefellers with the new schooling system, the new history, right? You know, what's his name? Nikola Tesla. He already had a car that drives without fuel, but of course that car is gone now. And after Nikola Tesla died, so they took away all his writings, all his books, right? And all we can do is now drive petrol cars, gas-driven cars, and you have to buy a new car every 4 years, right? And the Rockefellers made so much money. Or the oil is scarce, right? People still believe it, right? Yeah, Monica, she's talking about God will not let Jacob disappear. No, it will not, right? There's always a small remnant left. God likes to show off his power when we are heavily outnumbered, right? In the times of Noah, right? There's only Noah left. Even though I still believe there were other Adamic people still around, because if you just have Noah and 3 sons, even if they had wives, you cannot build millions of people out of 6 people. That's not how it works, right? Obviously, they went out, found other people. It was that region where God placed the Adam, that whole region there, right? That was destroyed by the flood because it was so heavily. It messed up the whole new creation, right? Yeah, yes, Justin. So, okay, guys. So, quick summary. In this video, I talked about that Genesis story is not the first story in history. It's our story of the Adamic people with our animals, right? How we domesticated horses, how we are the only people in the world who are the vast majority can drink milk, right? Why do you think in America when you buy milk, it's not even milk, it's more like water, so everyone can drink it. But sub-Saharan African people, all other races, also Jewish people, are lactose intolerant, right? This is our book, guys. And the giants, the fallen ones, the giant trees, the ancient 200,000-year-old ruins, the other races, they all come from an older world, right? That is what this video was about. Right? And to me, it makes sense. Why would God create a new world with different races who would attack each other anyway? It doesn't make any sense, right? All right, guys. So if you appreciate my channel, buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box. Appreciate that, guys. And the ones who already did, thank you very much. Much appreciated. And maybe you can share or like it. And maybe put a comment, not here, but below the video itself. That will help in the algorithms so we can reach more of our Adamic people. Because there are still a lot of Adamic people in the total darkness. And they don't even see that they are bringing upon their own demise. Right? They just don't see it. It's all about not offending anybody and virtual signaling. Look how great I am, how morally superior I am, right? Oh, and they don't see it even coming, right? So it's not God who can't wait to destroy us. No, it's we bringing upon this destruction who God has no chance to gonna do something, right? But it's gonna be a remnant, and maybe there will be a new heaven and a new earth coming. That means God has to destroy this world, right? I think Isaiah is talking about how this earth and heaven will be scrolled up like an old, right? Like will be destroyed like an old rag, like an old coat or something, right? So maybe we're headed towards another big destruction, right? And we'll start over from scratch, right? I don't care, guys, right? If we survive this, we're going to we're going to be in a new heaven and a new earth. And hopefully this time, creatures that are destroying everything will not survive it this time, right? And if we don't make it, then we will see the Father in the spirit, right? Right, guys, I love you all, and see you next time.